During your study of A-level psychology, you're going to cover dozens of theories. While you have to show knowledge of them in the exam, you have to be able to apply them, you also have to be able to evaluate them for those AO3 marks. So how do we do this? Well, this is Galbraith Does Psych, and this is another video in our Skills for Psychology series, and we're here today to explore exactly this. I'm going to take you through my way of evaluating a theory. Now, I don't use all of these every single lesson, but I'm trying to think about this thematically to give you some things to use when you're evaluating a theory. So, one thing I like to do to consider is how scientific the theory is. So, is it something that is objective? Is it testable? Is it observable? This sort of thing. Linked to this, I like to discuss the extent to which research supports the theory. So that's looking at studies that back up the key ideas of the theory, but it's also thinking about, have there been any studies that don't support it? And trying to assess, I suppose, the quality of the research support for a theory. I also try to think about how reductionist the theory is. So that's not necessarily just, it ignores biology, but how much of an oversimplification is it of the behaviour that it's trying to explain? I also would advise that you think about the explanatory power of the theory. So, for example, if it's trying to explain schizophrenia, does it actually explain all of the symptoms? Does it explain why someone would get schizophrenia at a proximal level, so kind of the immediate predecessor of them getting schizophrenia? Or does it actually explain where those things come from? Does it have distal explanatory power, so off in the distance, so the origins, the original cause of the behaviour? If it's trying to explain social influence, does it actually explain why we conform due to, say, normative and informational influence? Does it actually cover both of those things? Applications is a popular one. It's often an easy one to do because you're thinking about things like, are there therapies that are associated with this theory? Is it actually useful in society? What have people done with this theory? And lastly, the ethics/determinism. I know they're not the same thing, but they often can lead to similar arguments being made. If you ignore free will, does it take responsibility away from people to change their behaviour? Are there any consequences of saying that behaviour has a particular cause? Does it blame anybody in particular? Again, I'm thinking things like schizophrenia. If we take the family dysfunction theory, we're blaming the family for, or we're possibly blaming the family for the schizophrenia. So let's take an example. Let's take Bowlby's evolutionary theory of attachment, and we'll just whip through how this might work in practice. How scientific is it? Well, it's based on the principles of evolution. Now that would appear to be pretty scientific to me. However, one of the problems with evolutionary theories is actually running an experiment to test their principles. Yeah, we can't actually run we can't take a sample of children and say, oh, okay, well, you're going to have attachment, and this group over here, you're not going to have attachment, and we're going to see who survives. Yeah, so it makes it difficult to adhere to the scientific principles of things like falsification and replicability. But that said, people have collected evidence that is in line with Bowlby's theory. For example, the link between early attachment and later experience suggests that we do form, some kind of, whether it's a template or not, but there is an influence of our early experience into our later life. So we must take on board some of those elements. But is it quality research? I'm not here to knock any published psychologist, any researcher. Yeah. These are people that we should respect and we should look up to. I'm just here to ask the question of, for example, is it scientific, high quality evidence? A lot of the studies done around this area are correlational, for example. So we can't actually infer cause and effect. How reductionist is Bowlby's evolutionary theory? Well, at first glance, it would appear to rely on biological reductionism. So it's breaking down attachment into processes that are in line with evolution, as we said. It's there for survival. But, that said, if you delve a bit deeper into Bowlby's theory, he talks about, as we said, things like the internal working model. And that, to me, would seem to be a psychological approach, a cognitive approach to explaining the impact of attachment. So it's not just about evolution. He's also including elements of, for example, psychological theory. He also talks about things like social releases, so behaviour between individuals, which is approaching a social kind of level of explanation. So maybe it's not that bad at all. Explanatory power. Well, not only does Bowlby explain the nature of attachment, so how it works, he also explains the purpose of it, that being survival. Applications. I don't want to go off into his maternal deprivation hypothesis, there's lots you could say there, but just understanding about the internal working model, for example, is quite a good thing in terms of being able to understand the impact that those early experiences really do have on the rest of that child's life. So we can run interventions, parenting support classes, whatever it might be, to try to get those first few months, particularly, in the critical period, absolutely right. But in that application, does it become sensitive when we're talking about, for example, families that don't have the ability, for whatever reason, to spend those early few months with that child, having that quality time, that quality caregiving interaction? Does this theory stigmatise people for using daycare and things like that? It's possible. And so there could be an ethical discussion to be had there. Anyway, like I said, I wouldn't necessarily use all of these all the time. Yeah, there's too much there, even for a 16-mark essay, in my opinion. But it's a starting point. Yeah, it's themes to talk about. Thinking like this is also really helpful for revision, in terms of structuring your notes, in terms of your evaluation. You could put some grids together. Here's one that I've put together for forensic psychology, so that you can assess all of the different approaches to explaining offending behaviour based on these themes. But you could do this for any topic. And it is really helpful for coming to comparing explanations. And if you've seen my comparison video, then you'll see how those themes work. Okay, that brings us to the end. I hope you found that useful. I'm sure that I will see you around in another video. Thanks very much for listening, guys. Do pop a comment underneath, ask me a question. Let me know how you evaluate theories. Yeah? Thanks very much, guys. That's it. Bish bash bosh.